good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that have just joined, this is Rob Foster with Avigilon. I'm the sales engineer for the Central Region. And today we're going to be talking about lockdowns. But before I jump into that, just a couple housekeeping items. Just a reminder of, if you would, when you join the call, if you go on mute, just to cut down on some of the background noise. I will make sure that we leave time at the end to answer any questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, if you want to go ahead and get those out there, feel free to use the chat feature. And finally, just a reminder, we are recording this session. For those that aren't able to join today, they'll be able to watch that later. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just to double check, if somebody could come off mute and let me know that you are able to see my screen.
We can see your screen.
You're good.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you all. Okay, so today we're going to talk about lockdowns. There's a lot of different ways to do lockdowns with ACM. There's a lot of different policies that our end users have and how they want their particular lockdowns done. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some best practices, and I'm going to show you some common configurations. But what I want to make sure is that that you all understand that we're not security consultants, so we're not here to tell your end users how to do a lockdown, or if under this circumstance they need to do a lockdown, so on and so forth. We're here to help our end users, enforce their lockdown policies through technology. In this case, the technology being ACM. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there's many different ways that you can do a lockdown. You can do things like global actions to change the door mode. You can do macros and triggers to change the door mode. You can go in and manually change the door mode. But really, there's a preferred way to do that. And I'm going to talk about that method. And what that method is the priority door policy. And I'm going to get into why you should use this method versus, using global actions or macros and triggers or, what other methods you're using today. So what is a priority door policy? It's used to immediately activate a priority mode on a group of doors. Typically with this priority door policy, we'll take the door mode and we'll put it in card only or possibly locked no access. And again, this depends on the end user, how they want their lockdown to actually function. So a couple things that are unique about the priority door policy is one of the things, and I saw this with another end user that unfortunately didn't use a priority door policy. But a couple things to note, in this case, this end user had a panel reboot during the lockdown. Unfortunately, they used another method, so that method that they used did not survive the reboot. So when the panel came back online, it went back to an unlocked status. With the priority door policy, that won't happen. So if your appliance reboots, shuts down, if you have, failover scenario, if it fails over to the backup, the priority door policy will continue to persist, and your doors will remain locked. Also, same is true if your panel is disconnected from the network or the panel itself reboots. So another reason why you want to use a priority door policy is because the priority door policy is going to override any other actions. So, if you're in the middle of a lockdown and, a job spec is going to kick off, or you've got some other scheduled action that may change the door mode, the priority door policy is going to take precedence over those other actions. The only exception would be when you are in a priority door mode. If you have a user, in the actual user interface, and they have the doors commands during priority delegation, then they are able to override this. Now, this is by design. This is so if you are in, a priority lockdown situation, You may have first responders directing you to unlock certain doors, but leave other doors, in their locked status. So keep that in mind. That is there by design. And so I want to talk about the priority levels that I just mentioned, the active priority door policy, being right up here at the top. But one of the things I want to point out is when you create your door policy, if you don't click this checkbox that says priority, then basically your door policy drops down here to the low priority category. So it's real important when you go through and do your configuration that you don't miss this checkbox. When I help end users and partners out there set up lockdowns, and oftentimes people will call me and ask me to take a look at what they put together. And I see this a lot where the priority checkbox is missed. So definitely take note of this. So now that we've talked about using the priority lockdown, that's how we're going to secure our doors. How do we actually initiate that priority door lockdown? And so there's many different methods. You can use a physical button. You can use a lockdown dashboard, or a map. You could use a special token or a PIN code. You could use ACM verify. You could even go into the user interface and initiate the lockdown, or a combination of those things. So keep that in mind. I see all of these out in the field, and sometimes a combination of all these initiation methods. So one of the other questions I get asked a lot is, can a lockdown do more than just lock the doors? And the answer is absolutely yes. Some of the other examples, that we see out there, sometimes we'll have end users ask us, hey, I don't want to just lock the doors. I also want to restrict who can now gain access. So normally when your doors are in card-only mode, valid cardholders can continue to come through the door. In some cases, our end users don't want that. They want to restrict that access to maybe just first responders. So as part of that lockdown, we can initiate other actions to do things like remove access groups. Sometimes, end users want to fire outputs, that might be connected to strobes or sirens or so on and so forth. Send email, create an actual alarm event that will pop up on the screen. So just some of the examples of other things that we can initiate during the priority door lockdown. So a couple prerequisites I want to talk about. First and foremost, make sure you're running at least ACM 5.12.0. I'm going to say SR2. I believe it was actually introduced in SR1, but you should be running SR2 if you're going to still run 5.12.0. And obviously, any newer versions beyond that, the priority part of the door policy is supported. Last thing I want to mention is you need to be using Mercury control panels. This is not supported if you're using HID controllers. So now what I'd like to do, I'm going to skip over to one slide because I just want to make sure that you all see this. I neglected to present this during during my last session. And I just want to mention this now. We can share this link again. I will try to do this again at the end of the session. But if you don't already know about our ACM video tutorials, this is the link to access those. There's a lot of good information out there. So just keep that in mind. And also, as you're working through lockdown scenarios, feel free to reach out to your ACM sales engineer. We've set up a lot of these. We can certainly help you, work through the technical aspects of setting this up. Okay, so I'm going to transition over to the demonstration portion here. So I've logged into my test system. Just a couple things just to kind of get you all familiar with what we're going to be looking at. I've set up a test system with 4 entrances. So this could be any building. I've set it up in my scenario where this building is completely open to the public. You know, maybe it's a college campus or something like that, where during the day all the doors are unlocked. Obviously, if there's an emergency situation, they need to quickly lock these doors. So how do we do that? So I've already told you we're going to use the priority door policy to do this. So now I'm going to walk through how to actually set this up. Now, just a couple notes. I went ahead and set this up. So you're going to see some information already in my system, but I'm going to walk through each step. So the first thing that I typically start with is the actual door policy itself. So I'm going to go over here to roles. I'm going to go under policy. Now, you're going to see that I've already created the lockdown policy, but you know, in your case, you're going to click on add policy. You're going to come to this screen. You're going to want to select door as your policy type, and then that's going to open up the Mercury screen. So again, there's no HID tab here because it's not supported on HID hardware. If you do have HID hardware, reach out to your sales engineer and we'll certainly help you come up with the best practice for the HID hardware as well. Now, I am just going to make one quick change here. So this is the checkbox that I talked about during the presentation. Make sure you check this box. If not, this policy is going to run it at a low priority instead of a high priority. So what you're going to want to do is typically you're going to want to leave everything else in place at the door. There may be cases where you want to change some of these other functions during a lockdown, but at a minimum, you need to make sure you specify the access type as single. And then what we're going to do during the lockdown is we're going to change the custom mode. In my example, I'm using card only. So we're going to override whatever function the door is currently in, and we're going to put it in card only mode. Your end user may want to do locked no access. Maybe they don't want anybody getting through the doors. That's fine. No problem. And then as far as the schedule, we're going to set it to 24 hours active. And the reason we want to do this is because we want this change to persist for as long as the lockdown is in use. You know, many people might say, well, lockdowns, you know, typically over in hours, but I can tell you another use case for lockdowns that I just ran into recently, and that was a college campus. They were using their lockdown you know, during the coronavirus pandemic because kind of the same rules apply. They don't want anybody in the buildings except for, you know, in their case, their on-site security. I believe they also added facilities to their lockdown groups to let them in the building. So in that case, obviously that lockdown is going much longer than, you know, a few hours. This is persisting for several days. So make sure your custom schedule, I would recommend using the 24 hours active. And so after we set these parameters, we're going to save this. Now, once we have the policy, we need a way to apply that policy to doors. So in this case, okay, did somebody come off mute? What, was there a question? Okay, we'll just keep going here. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to have a means to apply this policy to doors. So what we'll do is we'll go to groups and we'll create a new group. I've already created one here. Now, once we create this group, we're going to want to go to members and we're going to select what type of objects we want to put in this group. In this case, we want to do doors. So in my example, these are all exterior doors. I want them all to lock down. So I'm going to put them all in this group. Your end user may not want interior doors locked down. So you would obviously not move those over to the members group. Once you have your members here, this is where you actually associate the group with the policy. You're going to go over to the policies tab. Under available, you'll see all your policies listed here. In this case, I only have one, so I moved it over to lockdown policy. So great. So we've got a lockdown policy and we have it applied to a group of doors. Now, Just a couple, or just a troubleshooting tip I'll mention here. I do have people call me from time to time and say my lockdown doesn't work. So one of the things you could do at this point, and obviously if you're working in a live site, you would need the end user's approval. But if you want to make sure that your policy works, you could always go to the policy menu here, and you can actually click right here. And that will basically initiate your policy or put it into effect. So now you could go over to the doors. You could look here and you could verify once this refreshes. Here we go. So you can verify that your priority door policy, and this is what lets us know that it's in priority. If I did not check that priority box, this would not say priority right here. But this is a good indicator that you've set it up correctly. We wanted it to apply to all 4 doors. It has applied here to all 4 doors. So we have set it up correctly. So now we want to turn it back off. So we can go back here and we can manually turn it off. Now, one thing I do want to point out, I didn't mention this when we talked about creating the policy, but make sure that you leave this uninstalled when you create it. If you install it, obviously once you apply it to a group of doors, it's going to go into effect, because clicking installed here is the same as clicking right here to install it. So just keep that in mind. So now we have a priority door policy that's working, that's applying correctly to the doors. Now we need to automate that, because we don't expect our end users to, in a emergency situation, to remember to go to roles and go to policies and to click right here. So let's make it easy. So the next thing we need to do is create global actions. And the reason I say global actions is because we're going to need one that turns on this policy, and then one that, when the lockdown is over, returns it to normal operation, which basically uninstalls the policy. So let's take a look at that. Go here. Now you're going to see I've got a lot of things already configured here. Now in this example, I'm going to walk through a couple different scenarios. So let me talk about the scenario. This would be a case where your end user wants a multi-level lockdown. Some of the terms that get used sometimes are a soft lockdown, versus a hard lockdown. And so how I've set this up in my system, a soft lockdown basically just puts the doors in card-only mode, but continues to let everybody use their card to get into the building. So this might be, a situation where there was a bank robbery across town. The end user's policy is to, at that point, put the, lock all the exterior doors, but continue to let people go through as normal. That's fine. Now, maybe your end user has a policy if there is a more immediate threat or a threat of, on campus, so to speak, they might want to go to a hard lockdown scenario. So in my example, I've taken a piece of the soft lockdown, which is to apply the door policy. And then I've added, I've added uninstalling access groups of everyone, and then installing access groups for first responders. Now that third piece where I talk about installing an access group for first responders, I don't see that used a lot. I see more people leaving the first responder group on all the time, especially if they have on-site police or security. Where I do see that where they want to leave the first responders uninstalled during normal scenarios is when maybe there's a separate agency responding, and they're worried that maybe that agency isn't keeping track of the cards, so they don't want those activated. Again, it's not for us to tell the end user how to do their lockdown. We're just here to implement their policies. So I'm going to walk through first the soft lockdown. So I'm going to start here. with A1, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to install the lockdown policy. So here's our global action. You're going to see that I've selected the type policy install/uninstall, and in this case, we're going to want to install the lockdown policy. So I've moved that policy from the available over to the members, and of course, we're going to click Save. Now, we need an all clear. We need a way to uninstall that policy, so I've created a second global action. Here it says R1 uninstall lockdown policy. So again, it's the reverse. We're going to uninstall the lockdown policy when we get the all clear. So that takes care of half of the automation. The other piece of it is how do we initiate the global action? So we need some type of linkage or trigger, if you will, to actually fire off that global action that installs the policy. So a couple different examples. One is kind of a soft trigger, if you will, and that's where you would use, in this case, a map. I've set up a lockdown dashboard map here. And what I've done, actually, I'm going to open this up in design view so you guys can see a little bit better. But what I've done here is these global actions that I just created. Right now, we're not talking about the hard lockdown, so just ignore this. We're just talking about the soft lockdown. And what you'll see here is that I'm executing that A1 install lockdown policy. And how I got this button is I went to global actions, I clicked add, and then I'm able to select which global actions I want to execute. And so I've created the soft lockdown button here, and I've created the normal operations button here, which uninstalls the lockdown policy. So now, just to test that, we'll go back over here to Maps. We'll open up our dashboard here, and I'm going to click Soft Lockdown. We've got a confirmation message here that our lockdown policy has been successfully executed. I added the door icons to the dashboard here just to illustrate. If you do have these doors plotted on a map, or in this case a dashboard, when you go into a priority lockdown scenario, we're going to draw this red bounding box around the status bar. So just another visual indicator that shows you are in a priority door lockdown scenario. Now in this case, lockdown is complete, so I'm just going to initiate or click here for normal operations. Now, this is one method that you can use, and with this method, you're executing the global actions directly, so you don't have to have a linkage or other trigger. So by pressing this button, it's the same as going to global actions here and executing it here. So now let's look at a scenario where we need to add a global linkage. So you might have a customer that wants to use a physical button. The buttons that my personal preference is I like the buttons that you push and they latch. And then you turn to reset them or use a key to reset them. Again, personal preference, whatever the end user wants to use, that's what you should use. So I'm going to go over to global linkages. And I'm going to look at our soft lockdown button activated. So what I'm going to do, again, I've already configured this. You'll add a new global linkage. You'll give it a name. You'll select devices. In this case, you're going to select an input. It's going to give you a list of inputs. I've already moved my input, which I have relabeled as soft lockdown. Good practice to label your inputs correctly. Now, what I have to do is define what event occurs at that button is going to result in my action. In this case, when that input point goes into alarm. So when they press that button in, it goes into alarm. Now, I'm going to skip over tokens because in this case we're not using tokens here. And I'm going to go to actions. So basically when I get an input point, the specific input point that's labeled soft lockdown button, when it goes into alarm, I want it to take this specific action. And so I go over here to actions, and here's a list of all my global actions. So in this case, it's a soft lockdown. All I want it to do is install the lockdown policy. So that's half of the equation, and that's half of the global linkage equation, I should say. Now what we need to do is create an action for when you reset that button and take it out of its alarm condition. And what that will do will be effectively uninstall the door policy. So let's walk through that. So soft lockdown button deactivated. Open this up. One of the important things here, this is a big one. This is what often gets missed right here. I get a lot of calls about this. How do I, when the button restores to normal, how do I initiate that from a global linkage? And this is where you do it. So you do the same thing under devices. You're going to select your input and then, input devices and then your specific input. Your event is, again, going to be input, point, and alarm. But by clicking this box, points return, we're saying when the input point goes from alarm to normal or returns to its normal condition, then that's when this linkage is going to go into effect. So finally, our action will be to uninstall the lockdown policy. So that's our global action there. So now that we have that button, we can initiate the soft lockdown from the map. We could also use the physical button. Now another scenario. Let's say they don't want to use a button. They want to use a special card. We've had that request before. So I've set up special cards. Sometimes they want to do it by color. I've used the colors of basically red for a hard lockdown, yellow for a soft lockdown, and green for normal operations. So all of our global actions, our policies and our groups, all of that, none of that changes. All we're doing is changing how we initiate those actions. So no additional programming to make this happen except for the global linkages. So let's walk through that. So what I've done for each of these scenarios is I've created an identity, and I've assigned those identities a card. I'll just show you one example here. I don't think we need to go through all of them, but I've given it a name. I've assigned it a role. Now, one of the things that I did with this role is I made sure with this that I did not uninstall the access group that's associated with this role, because obviously the cards aren't going to work. You'd be able to lock down the facility, but then you wouldn't be able to restore it with your card. So I've exempted this group from, or in this case, I should say the access groups that's associated with this role. I've exempted that from the hard lockdown policy. And then I've assigned it a token number. Now keep in mind, if you've got card readers out there that have pin pads and you'd rather use a pin number to do this, you certainly can do that. Just keep in mind that you'd have to adjust your door mode accordingly. So this could be a card, it could be a pin. Okay, with that in mind, let's go back to our global linkages. And let's look at the special card yellow. So what I've done, I've created a global linkage. I've gone to my devices here. In this case, I've selected doors. So here's where you're going to specify where this special card can be used. Maybe you only want one reader to be able to be used to lock down the facility, or maybe you want to be able to use all the readers. I just selected all the readers in this case. Now, we're going to go over to events. What specific events at that card reader are we going to use to trigger our lockdown? Now, I've got a few different events here. I've got local grant and I've got local grant not used. Depending on how you want this to work, if you just had local grant not used, if they presented their card and opened the door, this wouldn't initiate. And the same is true with local grant. If you just had local grant in place, you walked up, you presented your card, and didn't open the door, then it wouldn't execute. So I've got both in here because I want it to execute whether they open the door or not. And also, this one's important. So if the door is currently unlocked, and like in my example, all 4 doors are unlocked. Anybody can get in the facility. So when you walk up and present a card to an unlocked door, you don't get a local grant. You also don't get a local grant not used. You get this event, open to unlocked door. So you need to make sure that you have that in there so that the cards can be used even if the doors are unlocked. So now, once we have that configured, I'm going to go over to tokens. And this is where you're going to search for the specific token you want to initiate this action. It doesn't have to be just one token. You could have multiple tokens if you wanted to. In my example, I've got one. You can go here and you can actually search for the person. I've obviously already got this person in here, so we're going to leave this alone. And now when I go over to actions, this is where when this card is presented to any of those 4 readers, I want it to install the lockdown policy. So now this will work at all 4 readers. Now keep in mind, we need to do this. We took care of this for the soft lockdown feature. We'd also need to do this for the normal operations. So you can see I've got some of the same configuration here. Really the only difference is I've changed the token. So I've changed it to my green card user, and then I've changed the action. So when this card is presented, I want the system, I want the priority door policy to uninstall and go back to normal operations. So that's a simple lockdown. That may be all your end user requires. Maybe that's all they want to do. They just want to lock the doors. Now, if you get a more complex scenario, I mentioned the hard lockdown, where they want to do multiple actions. They want to install the door policy in priority mode. They want to uninstall everybody's access group. And then they want to install the first responders group. That's where we need to create additional global actions. So let's go back here, take a look at the hard lockdown. So we're transitioning back to global actions. So, and we're talking about the hard lockdown in this case. So I'm going to reuse what I've already used for my soft lockdown, this install lockdown policy. That's something I want to happen during my lockdown policy. I also want to uninstall all access groups. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So here we've got the type of, after we create a new global action, our type is going to be access group install / uninstall. And in this case, we're going to want to uninstall. And you'll see here that I did not include the first responders access group, and also didn't include my special cards access group. And my special cards in this case, that's the access group that's being used by the role that's assigned to the green card, yellow card, and red card users. Obviously, I want their access groups to work, or the cards won't trigger the lockdown functionality. So what I do want to do is I want to take away everybody else's access. So my employees and my contractors. So I've moved them over here to members. I'm going to save this. Now, also, if your end user wants to, if they're in that scenario where they want to leave the first responder access group uninstalled until there's an actual emergency, that's where we'd need to add this third global action here. In this case, we're going to create a new global action. our type again is going to be access group install, uninstall, and then our subtype will be install, and we'll install this first responder group. Now, how do I tie all that together? If you remember from the from the dashboard, we clicked on one button that executes a global action. Well, we don't want to have to add 3 buttons to the to the lockdown dashboard, and they got to click all 3 of them, and to make this happen. So what we do in that case is we create an action group, and that allows us to, when that action group is executed, it executes all of the group policies, or the global actions that are included in that action group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an action group that executes these 3 global actions. Let's take a look at that. So I'll create a new global action. My type will be action group, and then you'll get a list of all your global actions here. So I've moved, install the lockdown policy. Remember, we created that for the soft lockdown. Uninstall all access groups and install first responders access group. So that's everything that I'm going to initiate when I initiate this global action group. Now, obviously, we have to do the reverse. When the condition returns to normal, we want to put all the doors back in their normal operating mode, and we want to restore everybody's access groups. So just walking through this quickly, you'll see we're uninstalling the policy. We created this during our soft lockdown scenario, so we're going to reuse this. We're going to add install all access groups. So the ones that I uninstalled are the contractors access group and the main employees access group. Make sure you change your subtype to install. And then I'm going to create that third global action, and that's to uninstall the first responders access group. So again, we're just doing the reverse. Instead of installing here, we're going to uninstall. And then finally, we're going to create an action group to tie it all together. So I've selected my 3 global actions here. So when I execute that global action group, all 3 of these actions are going to occur. Okay, so what does that look like? Let's go back and look at our dashboard here. We'll go to Maps. We'll open up our lockdown dashboard, and you'll notice hard lockdown. Let me open this up here. You'll notice that I've selected this global action group versus these individual global actions here. So that's how you'll execute multiple global actions at once. So now what we can do, just to see what this looks like, let's go back to our map here, and let's do a hard lockdown. We get a confirmation message here that it's initiated. Again, our red bounding boxes. Now we've added the additional steps of uninstalling access groups, of our contractors and our employees, but also installing the first responder access group. So let's go take a look and make sure that occurred. So if we go to roles and then access groups, you'll see here that the contractors access group, as well as the main employee access group, both of these have been uninstalled. Okay, we get the all clear. Let's go back. Let's return everything to normal operations. So you can see we're, one of the things you'll notice here, instead of creating a restore button for both the hard and the soft lockdown, when I do normal operations, I'm going back. So even if it was a soft lockdown, I'm still executing those actions to reinstall the access groups and uninstall the first responder group. Even though those weren't unchanged, it's not going to hurt anything to execute those actions. It's just going to see that those changes are already in place, and it's just going to continue on. If you really want to, you could have a dedicated normal operations button for, each type of lockdown. Again, that's up to you. So let's restore our operations here. This executes our global action group. Uninstalled our door policy here, our priority door policy, I should say. We'll go back here to access groups. You'll probably have to refresh this to see the changes. Now that I've refreshed that, you see that the main employees and main employees and contractors access groups have been reinstalled, and the first responders access group has been uninstalled. So, same thing over on, if we go back to our global linkages, same thing with the hard lockdown. If you want to use, you can use the dashboard as I just showed you, or you could use a physical button to execute the hard lockdown, or you could use the special card. Of course, there's other options out there. There's ACM Verify that you could use to initiate a lockdown. I'm sure there's other things that I haven't thought of or mentioned today. So just keep in mind this is highly customizable. It could be adapted to whatever your end user needs are. But the big thing to remember is when you actually need to change the door mode, then I recommend that you use the priority door policy. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. I'm going to take a look at the chat while you all decide if you have any questions.
So there is one question there, Rob.
Okay, let's see. Is Ali asking for the link? Yeah, it looks like he posted it there. Okay.
There's a question for Jeff at the bottom. What is a global action fails in an action group? Does it stop or just do it additional steps?
I believe it would continue on to the next global action. Do you have anything to add to that, Francisco?
Same as you, right? Especially if I'm doing a global linkage triggering those actions, right? It will go through the list of those actions. And if for some reason one of the actions cannot be triggered, I will just continue moving. So the system will send a command. Now, if it fails to execute, then it would have to look into the reports, right? Into the events to see what happened, but it will continue to execute the rest of the actions. At least that's my.
Yep, I would agree. And just remember, when you're troubleshooting, I showed you how you could go to policies to turn on the door policy to check to make sure it's working correctly. That's what you're going to want to do. If things are not working correctly, you're going to want to break it down in pieces. Check to make sure the policy works by executing the policy directly. The case of global actions. If you execute a global action group and, in the case of the hard lockdown, only 2 of the actions work that are part of that action group. Well, then go in and execute those global actions individually so you can troubleshoot them and see what's going on. They've got a lot of different troubleshooting tools, available to you. You can also go to events, see what kind of events are being returned. Do we have any other questions?
And Rob, if you don't mind adding something to this, for this more complex configurations, we're using global actions, linkages, macros, triggers, all this good stuff that the customer is looking for a custom configuration to satisfy a condition to solve a problem, right? So if they have questions or they need assistance, they can always come back and look for the sales engineering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? We can, we will, basically the process is, let the partner reach our salesperson, get in contact with the sales engineering team. We'll meet with this partner to understand what the conditions are. We'll try to map the whole process, and then we'll put this on one of our testing sites. We'll ask for, a little bit of time to go test, a couple of days to go test that. And then once we're done testing, once we're comfortable that functionality is working, then we can bring the partner in to take a look, and we'll give them access to that system so they can see how we configured in our testing environment. Okay? Just so everybody knows. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. Some of the other things I've seen too, I have had some end users want to use momentary buttons, instead of the latching style buttons. In their case, they wanted to be able to initiate a lockdown from the button, but they didn't want to be able to restore the lockdown from the button. They wanted that to be done from the software. So, there's all kinds of different combinations. And just like Francisco said, if you get a unique scenario, bring it to your sales engineer. We're certainly happy to test out, the unique, scenario that they may have, and see if we can come up with a viable solution. System's very flexible. There's a lot of different ways we can do lockdowns. A lot of different options out there. So any other questions?
Chat is clean. No more questions in the chat.
No more questions. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then we'll go ahead and conclude here a little bit early. Just a reminder, we do have another Lunch and Learn on Friday that Jared will be hosting. Jared, are you on the line?
I don't see him in there.
You don't think so? Oh, okay. So stay tuned for the topic for Friday. I don't know, Francisco, do you know the topic for Friday? I know it'll be included in it.
Yeah, I didn't see him putting a topic there yet. I think he's still probably putting it together. So,
okay.
So stay tuned. It'll be a surprise one.
Yeah, it'll be a good one. And of course, remember, Francisco is hosting a Lunch and Learn on Mondays as well, 12 Eastern time, 1 o'clock. Be sure to join that as well. Anything to add to that, Francisco, or are you?
Yes, next Monday, I'm going to start, we're going to try to do a series of wireless locks, because there's a lot of questions and confusions and things. So I'm going to start with one of the wireless locks. I'll probably get the NDE to start with, and then you will see us focus this presentation, some of the presentations in wireless locks. So it maybe dive a little bit more in each particular one that we support. So just stay tuned for that. I think that's the topic I'm picking for next Monday, the 20th, on noon Eastern time. Don't forget, Jared is doing this Friday at noon Pacific time. Okay? That's it for me. Thanks,
awesome.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. And as always, if you have any suggestions for topics, anything in particular you would like us to review, feel free to let me know right now. Feel free to shoot any of us an email, and we'll certainly take that into consideration. With that being said, it doesn't look like we have any more questions, so thank you all for your time this afternoon, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.